So we have Sri Jiten Yumnam. I welcome you, Mr. Jiten, on behalf of the Corbett Foundation for expressing your views on socio-economic conditions and what changes we can expect because of such policies which neither support the biodiversity nor are very sustainable in terms of economics, because generally local economic conditions and traditions are ignored while designing such policies. So, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Jiten is Secretary of Center for Research and Advocacy Manipur. It's an indigenous people's human rights organization that is based in Manipur in Northeast India. And Mr. Yumnam writes with media establishments in Manipur. Um, uh, Manipur, say for example, he has written for Imphal Free Press, Shanghai Express, ePower.net, etc., many others as well. And he has already published two books, very good books, Dams and Indigenous People Rights in Manipur. And the other one is called Development Aggression, Rethinking India's Neoliberal Developments in Manipur. So you can make a note of these books and you can even look at them, and as if possible, we all should try to read them. He is also a filmmaker and produces documentary based on indigenous people's rights and issues in Manipur, such as Wall of Injustice, Turbulent Waters of Loktak Wetland, Oil Exploration, Boon or Bane in Manipur. These films will be also very good resource material for all of us. He has attended several national and international events related to protection of land, including the international meet on protection of rivers in Georgia 4 years ago. And then he had also attended the adoption of Sustainable Development Goals at UN headquarters in New York, US in 2015. And he attended the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development in Brazil in 2012. So we are delighted to have a very seasoned and versatile speaker with us, followed by Sri Salam Rajesh Saab's talk. So I welcome you, Mr. Jiten, to please explain and express your observations so that we all can benefit from it. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Naveen, and also thank you. Express my thanks to Corbett Foundation and also to the Rainforest Foundation in Tamenglong, and I especially thank the two organizations for taking this time to discuss and dwell on this very pertinent and also very pressing issues of concern, the palm oil controversy, and especially with the recent announcement of the mission on edible oil and palm oil. It has landed into much controversy all over Northeast. And of course, this is not a new mission though, because the same mission was announced quite some time back in the 12 5-year plan in 2012, 2017, several years back. And in fact, the push for palm oil has been around for quite some time in the region, not just in Northeast, but even in other parts as well. And then, of course, in Mizoram has been quite ahead in terms of promoting, through adoption of series of policies. And I think when we talk about palm oil, it's really, really important that we also talk, dwell on the series of policies which are adopted to provide an enabling environment for the palm oil cultivation, promotion for palm oil, and it's really important that we look into different policies and laws related to land. For example, policies and laws that related to the effort to mitigate and adapt climate change, in the region, and then of course there are a series of other policies related to the food security and promotion of food security and food sovereignty across the region. So I think it's good to look into those contexts, and specifically when we look at the policy, and of course the national mission on oil seed, oil palm, is there. But then it's good to look into other policies like the new land use policy, because I think this is a very controversial policy, which was introduced way back in 2011 in Mizoram, and I think that's also kind of laying the foundation for the push for palm oil in Mizoram. And similarly, in 2014, the government of Manipur also tried to push the new land use policy. And this is a policy that tries to undermine the community ownership of land, the communities, the traditional agriculture pattern and form, not just in Manipur and across the region, like in Mizoram. And these two states, and then of course in Manipur, because of the potential impact, many of the communities, the indigenous groups are able to say, object, and able to resign the project, the policy, new land use policy. Yeah, and so what these policies did is to create an enabling environment. It promote commercial agriculture, and through that commercial agriculture, it kind of push this kind of cash crop, and then other economic oriented kind of plantations, which includes palm oil, which includes rubber, which includes several other rubber, coffee or tea or whatever. And I think it's really important that we reflect on the palm oil mission, which was introduced again just recently by the government of Manipur. And then from last year onwards, the palm oil mission was introduced August 2020. During the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. And then, of course, just recently again, the Manipur government also comes up with, with the initiative to push for palm oil again. Similarly, the continuation of the oil palm mission in Manipur. And it's really important to see this context, and what are the reasons as to why this kind of palm oil has been pushed through. Of course, they give various reasons. And several reasons which they give. I think it's important to look into the reasons, because one of the reasons which they give, among others, is of course they say they wanted to control zoom cultivation, the traditional agriculture practice, which is very much prevalent in Tamenglong, in many of the areas in Manipur. So in a way, the push for palm oil, it begins with the notion that the traditional agriculture pattern is unsustainable, it's destructive for environment, it's bad. And I think that's, again, it's a process of a definition of a development objective, which is surely pursued by the government without the consultation and involvement of the community. And I think the problem lies from there, the very perception of land, the very perception of what development is, the very perception of how development should be pursued. And I think that's the fundamental clash of the perception of land, perception of development. I think that that's where the entire problem of the push for palm oil begins with. And because the implementation of that perception, that notion of development, I think that will fundamentally lead to ultimately into a series of conflict over land, conflict over resources, conflict over, and that conflict is already visible in Mizoram, because in Mizoram, the push for palm oil has been there for almost 10 years. It's been there for almost 10 years with the push for with several policies adopted there, and there are series of reports, study reports, and also series of media reports as well. And in fact, we had the privilege to visit some of the areas, the scholarship district area, which is the prime, prime area for palm oil push in Mizoram. And there we see series of issues around land, conflict around land, the challenges with land, because many indigenous farmers, they already accepted the implementation of the new land use policy. So they already accepted not just palm oil cultivation, but even other forms of so-called alternative livelihood, which includes broomstick cultivation and then several others. But then the implementation has led to a series of problems because the government were unable to fulfill, the provision of subsidy, the politicization, for example, in the selection of the beneficiary, for example. And then most importantly, the failure to conduct an impact assessment, because in the push for palm oil cultivation in Mizoram, for example, one of the biggest controversy right now is the lack of consultation, appropriate consultation in accordance with the norms and tradition of many of the indigenous community. So there is no free, prior, and informed consultation with the provision of the detailed impact assessment. And then there is no detailed social, environmental, and economic assessment, due to the push for palm oil cultivation. I think that failure and that lapses is now beginning to unfold. The impact of that is beginning to unfold in Mizoram. And I think it's really, really important for us to look into what is happening in Mizoram, looking into the impact on biodiversity. Of course, a lot of the discussion around concern around responding to the palm oil push in Northeast it tends to focus a lot on the environmental aspect. Yes, it's important that we focus on environmental aspect, and in fact, the impact will be colossal in terms of the environment, impact on the biodiversity, impact on the flora, fauna, impact on the endemic species. I think that's really, really important. But then it's also important that we look into the social impact. That is really important. We look into the economic impact at the community level. It's also important to look into the cultural impact, because cultural impact is really, really serious impact when it comes to palm oil cultivation, because it involves undermining the traditional agriculture pattern. It involves undermining the traditional preservation of seed. It affects the perpetuation of indigenous knowledge and indigenous traditional practices. So we really need to look into different dimensions. Environmental is one, social impact, economic impact, and then of course the cultural impact, and then which are very much essential aspect of looking into the overall sustainable development standards. And one of the major impact of this push for palm oil, which we already see in Mizoram, and then of course in other parts of the Southeast Asian countries, is land grabbing or land acquisition, massive land acquisition, because which led to forceful displacement of indigenous community, eviction, violence associated with eviction and displacement. I think this is, and in fact, if you look at the new mission, the recent announcement of the mission, the plan, the target area for palm oil push across Northeast is in terms of millions of hectares. And this is a very disturbing trend promoting palm oil in over 20 lakh hectares of land in Northeast. It will simply unleash a colossal destruction on people's land and resources. And I think this will lead to the destruction of forests ultimately. And one major casualty will be the loss of livelihood, many of the indigenous communities. And most of the communities across Northeast continue to practice Sweden or Zoom cultivation, which is very much a traditional form of agriculture, and which is very much part and parcel of not just a culture, but even which defines a relationship with the land, which defines a unique and inalienable relationship with the land, and in fact, which forms the basis of the culture and identity and tradition and way of life. And I think loss of livelihood is one of the major impact now, because with the cutting down of forests and then with the pursuit of massive palm oil push all over, it will, palm oil, as also shared by the previous speaker, it also entail a massive use of chemicals and fertilizer and pesticides and all kind of weedicides. And I think this will also lead to the contamination of water, contamination of all the all the habitable and cultivable areas. And one impact will be with the loss of forests. And as you know, Tamenglong is one of the most biodiverse region in Manipur. If you look at the concentration of the flora and fauna in Tamenglong, this is one of the major hotspot area. In fact, there are several wildlife sanctuaries, the Kailam Wildlife Sanctuary, for example. There are several wildlife sanctuary and very bio-eco-sensitive areas in Tamenglong. And so the push for palm oil all over Tamenglong, I think it will unleash massive destruction of forests, and with the loss of forest, it will also lead to shortage of water as well, because the source of water will also dry up. And we already seen several examples, like the blasting and destruction of forests due to the railway work in Tamenglong. It already led to drying of streams in several villages in Tamenglong. So I think with the pursuit of palm oil, with the destruction of massive areas of forest, it will unleash not just an impact on the flora fauna, but also on the source of water, available water, and then it will also lead to contamination of water. Most of the water bodies, Irang, Makru, Ijai, and then even Barak River will be contaminated. And I think that will entail a massive impact on the livelihood. The fish, aquatic species will also be back, and I think it will entail a very extensive impact on the environment, on the biodiversity, and I think that will also lead to a loss of many of the endemic species. And with the loss of forests, with the loss of the water bodies, this will also directly contribute to the climate change impact, because in Manipur we already see change in the climate, sporadic weather pattern, unpredictable rainfall and flood and whatever. And this will, with the burning of forests, with the destruction of forests, this will unleash a massive impact on climate. then the cultural impact, no, with the loss of forests. This is something, and I wish to focus on the cultural impact, and also based on my experience, because I was able to visit some of the Dayak and Ivan community in West Kalimantan, in Borneo Islands, and also in Sabah and Sarawak, in northern part of Borneo Islands, in Malaysia side. So there, with our friends, we were able to visit several areas which are extensively covered with palm oil cultivation, especially in West Kalimantan in Indonesia. The palm oil plantation is so extensive over there, and we try to understand some of the issues which affects the indigenous community out there. And one of the main impact is, apart from the loss of culture, which induce a lot of the loss of land and loss of forest, this induce a massive impact on the culture, indigenous culture, because many of the Ivan and the Dayak community who lose their forest area, who lose their agricultural land, especially those losing their forest area, they can no longer source their many of the items which is required for the culture, which is required for making the traditional handicraft and other craft items, and many of these craft items are very much essential part of their rituals and ceremony, and then what happened is we were able to talk with series of indigenous youths, Dayak youths especially, who were trying to revive their culture, and one form of reviving the culture is acknowledging the fact that the palm oil and also the logging and other mining, those kind of destructive form of development, how it unleashes, how it entails loss of land and how it affects the culture, especially the culture of the youth, because many of the youths, they can no longer go to the forest. If they want to go to the forest to collect their traditional source of their raw materials for their cultural items, then they only find the palm oil, extensive palm oil plantations, and I think that has directly affected culture, And so one way of reviving culture is by promoting the defense of the land, by promoting resistance to new land acquisition for palm oil cultivation. So so the loss of culture is quite extensive out there, and then there are several cases where many of the oil palm companies, including companies from India, they are involved in desecrating or forceful acquisition of many of the land area which are very much sacred for their ceremonies and rituals, and for their communities, sacred areas, which are also part of the acquisition of land. So this led to a lot of, and another issue that we find is the conflict, multiple layers of conflict, especially the land conflict. Some conflicts are among the community because of land conflict, between different communities. So that is also one of the conflict. Another conflict is within the company and between the landowners, within the villages, especially the conflict between landowner, the villager, and the oil companies. I think this is one of the very major form of contestation and conflict which we come across in Dayak areas in West Kalimantan. And those conflicts also lead to abuse and violation of rights of the villagers, because often what happens is many of the local police and also the administration, the concerned area administration, they were together with the oil companies, with the oil palm companies, and that's how it's easy for those promoting oil palm cultivation to also promote human rights violation. And and I think this is one thing that we need to consider very seriously when it comes to palm oil push in Manipur, is to be very careful with the role of the corporations, because corporatization of development or control of land by the corporation, I think this will also lead to series of conflict in Manipur, in Tamenglong, and we already see conflict in Tamenglong because of the railway push. How many villages are already having conflict especially in the areas affected by the Trans-Asian Railway. We saw a series of conflict in Awangkul, in Oenamlong, and even in Marangching areas, because of land-related conflict due to the Trans-Asian Railway. So it's really important to to be mindful of the kind of level of conflict that will emerge due to palm oil push. No? And then, of course, there will always be people from within the community which are supported by the local MLA or, big businessmen or even by the government who will want to pursue this, for the sake of getting subsidies and benefits from the government. I think that will also be another source of conflict. And another area that we also need to look, when you look at the economic exploitation, economic aspect, this is one very serious area. Like, if even we don't even need to look far, no, we can look at Mizoram. One of the challenges that the farmers in Mizoram who grow palm oil, which they face is, it's difficult for them to sell the palm oil at the market at the price that they deserve. No? So which means the companies like in Mizoram, one of the major company is Godrej. Godrej is one of the company which is involved in extensive palm oil in Mizoram, and they control the market. So farmers, they cannot command the price of the oil palm, no? Even if they cultivate. It takes more than 5 to 7 years to get the fruitlings, and then they cannot sell at the market, that they at the price that they want. So which means there is an exploitation by the company, by the oil palm companies and corporations. And I think this is the same trend that happened in West Kalimantan also, among the Dayak community. What I find is the government and also the company, they push for cultivation of palm oil extensively in West Palm, some voluntarily, some forcefully. And then the farmers there, one of the biggest challenges is again the market pricing of the oil palm also, because once there is a surplus production, then the oil companies, they also reduce the price, and then so they play around with the market and pricing. And I think this is one of the major struggle with many of the areas. And then of course the companies, they will only by exploiting the farmers, then they will reap huge profit. So which means exploiting, the oil palm push will facilitate the corporatization and profiting by oil palm farm companies by exploiting the land, by exploiting the resources, by exploiting the people. And I think this is something that we really need to be very mindful of. And then when you look at the human rights violation, there are several forms of human rights violation, and I will not go into that because I was able to mention a little bit earlier. And then it's also good to look into some other impact because when there is a push for oil palm plantation, there is always the need for workers, and then of course the local community who lose the land, they will be part of it. But then a lot of the workers will come from outside Tamelong, from outside Manipur, and then so which means there will always be a different dimension of social conflict. And then there is also a dimension of social impact in terms of health impact. There will be an increase in the use of drugs. There will be an increase in prostitution, for example. There is always an increase in the violence against women. I think this is an experience which people feel in West Papua. This is a territory, under Indonesia. Still there, apart from the conflict is again very much visible out there. But then there are other forms, which includes drug use and violence against women and all. I think that is something that we also need to see. So so when we look at the impact of palm oil across Northeast or even in Manipur, I think we need to approach from those different aspects, looking from the health impact, and then of course when we talk about health, the massive contamination of land used due to use of pesticide and chemicals, and and it will not just contaminate the land but also water, as I said earlier, but then this will unleash massive health impact on the community. And then there are also issues around the labor rights violation, people who are involved in the palm oil cultivation plantations, they're subjected to low wages, exploitation, labor rights violation. So there are a series of violations like that, which is reported in other places. So it's really important that we look into those different dimensions, looking into the social dimension, looking into the economic dimension, looking into the environmental dimension, looking into the cultural dimension, which is really very important. And then to look into this aspect, and then and then unless and until these are not taken into consideration, then we cannot say that there will be sustainable development. And then palm oil has been pushed for, as part of economic growth and sustainable development and all kind of. And then there is also the dimension of, at this point of time, there is also the challenges with the procedural procedural lapses. No, like there is no consultation with the community. There is no proper way to inform the community on the larger implications of palm oil post. And there is no consultation looking into the impact on children, for example, on the coming generation, or impact on women, for example. And we should not allow a process of promoting this kind of development without conducting a detailed impact assessment, and also without consulting the community. And from our side, from Manipur, I think it's also important that we understand the multiple implications, long-term implications, the short-term implication, also looking into the experience in Mizoram and then other places, like of course people, and I think from Asia, cases in Indonesia and Malaysia, it provides very good examples of how palm oil can be unsustainable, how palm oil can be destructive, and even we can also find good examples of how communities were able to raise awareness and also take bold steps to defend the land, and also to combat and confront oil palm companies. And also to address the unaccountability of the corporate bodies involved in the push for palm oil there. And it's also important for us to look into the policies. There are a range of policies that are pursued, as I said, the new land use policy is one. And then recently the government of India comes up with this draft forest policy 2018. And all those policies they promote. And then the government is trying to amend the Indian forest law in 2019. And if we see, we need to check the premise and also the purpose of the government objective of revising these policies, forest policies especially. And this, the revision of these policies, the forest policies, are all intended to to undermine the community ownership of land and forest. It's more also to promote the private sector role in the management of the forest. So which means the pursuance of palm oil can already be considered as part of promoting forest deforestation, afforestation and reforestation kind of initiative. And these are very much part and parcel of promoting response and solution to climate change. Climate change adaptation and mitigation, and India comes up with series of policy on climate change. And I think it's good for us to look into the Green India mission, for example, the Green Manipur mission, for example, and a lot of this, including the push for plantation and cash crop and rubber and other cash, economic oriented kind of crop, for example, and I just already part of those initiatives. I think it's really important that we look into this kind of policy. And further, at this point, it's really, really important that the youths of Manipur, including from Tamenglong, we should find ways to learn from what is happening nearby in Mizoram. People should go to Mizoram and listen to the stories of difficulties and challenges of the push for palm oil there in Mizoram. Even if we cannot go to other places like Malaysia or Indonesia, it's really important to get an exposure and listen to different stories of how palm oil has been unleashing havoc and devastation out there. And then also it's important to mobilize our farmers, our own community farmers, our own farmers, because for them, a lot of the farmers will be willing to take subsidies from the government, for immediate relief and all. But it's really important the farmers are aware of the long-term implications, not just thinking of the immediate thing. So that's why it's really important that this meeting is really important, so that we understand and then to come up with more research. It's really important that we conduct research on what are the experiences from different regions, from Manipur, from Mizoram, from Northeast, and so that we can inform our own stakeholders and different environmental groups and human rights group, community organizations, so that there is a collective effort in that. And then we should promote the defense of our land, the defense of our environment, the integrity of our ecosystems and biodiversity. I think that's really, really important. And and unless and until the government consult or conduct the detailed impact assessment, I think there is no reason that people should be accepting the palm oil push at this point of time, because everyone is already aware of the negative multifaceted implications of palm oil cultivation in different parts of the world, and also close by in Mizoram. So with that, I would look forward to further discussion, and thanks for giving me this opportunity. Thank you.
Thanks to Mr. Jiten for your very intense talk and covering almost all the dimensions of palm oil cultivation. the dimensions which are very subtle in nature, sometimes we don't see them. So you have touched upon those, and your talk took us right from the policies of land grabbing and lack of community sensitization, community consultation at the very beginning of the process when it had started, and then took us to the impact on ecology, and then about contamination of our water bodies, and how this palm oil push could probably impact the cultural identity of the indigenous community. So it's a very, very enlightening talk, and there is a lot to learn and talk. And in the end, you stressed upon the need for conducting research from uh, from the places where such push has been implemented, and what kind of socio-cultural, economic, and ecological impact the push has had. So it's a very important suggestions coming up from Mr. Jiten. So thank you very much for such a beautiful, enlightening talk. And I'm sure that the message contained in your talk, which covers quite a large dimension of such commercial monoculture plantations. Thank you very much for this. I can also see Dr. Chambo is uh, present today in the audience. Thank you very much, Dr. Chambo, for being a guiding force for the Corbett Foundation and for Rainforest Club. And then I can see Ram is present. Thank you very much, Ram, for being there. So there is a comment in the chat section which reads like, the biggest impact of unsustainable palm oil production is the large-scale devastation of tropical forests, as well as widespread habitat loss for endangered species. This can lead to significant soil erosion. So we would like to know, Mr. Jiten, what is your take on the above statement? This is a request from one of the participants.
Yeah, I totally agree with your statement. This is also what I touched a little bit on my earlier sharing as well. Because a push for palm oil in places like Tamenglong and other parts, it will entail the destruction of forests naturally, and of course, the government will use different premises, no, reforestation of degraded areas, and then, they will use whatever terms and terminologies, but then ultimately, the push for palm oil will ultimately take place in forest and forest areas, no, and also in agriculture areas. And also with the target areas, no, if you look more than 20 lakh hectares in Northeast alone, and that will, if you see the proportion of land in Manipur, I think it will entail a massive target of palm oil push in Manipur in huge portion of land, and then if you push for palm oil in place like Tamenglong, for example, and Tamenglong, most of the land are in forest area, a very small section of land along the river valleys, like Barak and in Irang and this thing. Yeah. So it will entail massive destruction of forests, and then also, and then Tamenglong is one of the biodiversity hotspot, and then one of the major component of the biodiversity hotspot in Manipur, and then most of the endemic flora and fauna is reported from Tamenglong. And then in fact, new fish species, for example, are still being discovered in Irang River or Barak River just recently. And and then there's a huge controversy, and also huge reporting around this tiger. The initial part of this session, we talk about the tiger, the location of tiger footprints and possibility of tiger in Tamenglong. And so, yeah. So I'm very much agreeing with your point that it will entail massive impact on the. And then when it comes to the soil erosion, yes, because when you convert the forest into palm oil, the palm oil, this is a monocultivation, and I've seen this in West Kalimantan, like in the difference between palm oil monocultivation area and the forest area. In forest area, you have big trees, small trees, shrubs, and then all kind of different kind of species. Diversity is a unique part. But in the case of palm oil, you have palm oil, but nothing grows in the what you call in the lower portion of the soil. So which means there is no other plant or other which can hold back the soil, and I think that is also one of the things. And then the use of extensive chemicals and this thing, and yeah, and I think it will not just lead to contamination. And then one impact that I also see is when it comes to the soil erosion, if you cut down the forest, automatically it will lead to soil erosion. Whenever, because Manipur is also a very high rainfall area. And then it will also lead to the impact on the river system itself, because not just that it will drain, the flow pattern of the water and the river will also change, because of the loss of forest. This is what we also see, and I would also highlight that when we, just to mention briefly, another point is taking this advantage is because when you talk about palm oil in areas like Tamenglong, we also need to see the palm oil push in Tamenglong or in Manipur with the larger push for unsustainable development in the region. So, for example, in Tamenglong area, how many dams are being pushed along Irong and Barak River? How many other unsustainable mega projects are pushed? The Trans-Asian Railway, and then the oil exploration, for example, the mega road projects. So we also need to see the cumulative impact of the multiple mega unsustainable destructive project pushed in the region. And I think this will ultimately and cumulatively impact on the forest. And that will entail massive impact on the soil, on the air, on the water, and on the land and the forest. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jiten. This was a very substantial response to that statement. Thank you very much. Mr. Salam Rajesh sir, I had a question for you. Like, say you have been working in Loktak area, and what kind of impact do you see on wetlands, and particularly in context of Loktak and the endemic diversity that it supports? So if palm oil cultivation is practiced at a large scale, the kind of push that the government is considering, what sort of impact you will see on Loktak lakes?
Actually, that question is talking on palm oil. I think it's still not relevant in a sense that palm oil government is trying to push in the upland area. And we have to study where government is actually planning to do the plantation. So where the plantation is, are these areas in the catchment of rivers that flow directly into Loktak. So, but at this point of time, because government is planning in Jirigam and Transabut districts, far away from Loktak and not directly related to Loktak. At this point, I just would like to, for our viewers in Tamenglong, especially, I would point out that the timing of the introduction of oil palm in Northeast is very unfortunate and ironic in the sense that now 2021 to 2030 is the decade on UN decade on ecosystem restoration, where United Nations and its all subsidiary bodies are pushing for restoration of degraded land, forest land, particularly forest land in North. So in terms of Manipur and other parts of Northeast India, if you look at this UN decade on ecosystem restoration, it's talking about recovering the degraded fallow land. In Manipur, as in other Northeast, we are practicing slash and burn and shifting cultivation, where fallow lands are, most parts of fallow lands go wasted. So in terms of the UN focus, we are expected to recover the forests that were depleted. But now the government is talking about introducing palm oil in fallow land, particularly in fallow land, because government projecting fallow land as degraded wasteland. But if you, I'm not an ecologist, but as an ecologist, if you look at fallow land, these are not degraded land. They can recover if you leave them alone. But as the government of Manipur sees it, they see that fallow lands are wasteland. And that is a problem. That is a problem area as I personally view. Because in our cycle, Manipur, you say Nagaland, Arunachal, we recover land at the average of 14 years. That is the fallow cycle. Now it's come down to 8-9 years, but still we recover land. So fallow is still a fertile and not a degraded land. But now the push for oil palm plantation in Manipur is like when government Manipur says Imphal West district. They're particularly looking at foothills, hillsides where they see it as degraded land. But I don't see this as degraded land. It has been exploited by people for timber logging and sitting plus and burn. But otherwise, if you recover this as if you follow the principle ecosystem restoration, this land can spring back again as very valuable forest. So what few of us are studying on ecology and environment conservation, and what the government of Manipur sees, it's on a very contradiction. There's a lot of contradictions there. We see fallow land as fertile land in a time space where if you leave them alone, they will recover. There is secondary regeneration, but they will recover into forest land. But now that's the problem with this palm oil project. So all fallow lands in Imphal West district, Kawal Bishenpur district, or even Tamilong, Jiribam, and they can be classified by the government of Manipur as degraded wasteland and so suitable for palm monoculture. So if you are coming back to the question of how this oil palm might impact Loktak Lake, if oil palm monoculture comes into the catchment area in Imphal West but catchment of Loktak is basically in Bishnupur, Chantapur district and Senapati district. So if oil palm monoculture comes into the catchment area and oil palm cultivation, as we are talking in of Sri Lanka case, of Indonesia or Peru, the discussion is about how oil palm is directly relevant to either degradation of groundwater or contamination of groundwater. So if that happens in case where oil palm is introduced and taken up in hillsides and upland, where these are catchment of rivers that flow directly into Loktak, then ultimately contaminated water will reach Loktak. And Loktak is already facing a lot of ecological problems. So another headache will be added to, in addition to pollution. So contamination will, if happens, then entire ecosystem of Loktak will be disturbed permanently, and everybody who develop fishes, their livelihoods will be. But that's the danger of palm oil in the context of ecology and environment.
Thank you, Salam sir. There is another question that is directed to Mr. Jiten. We have Dr. Sharat Kumar from Aligarh Muslim University, and he has asked whether the government has any plan to have palm oil plantation on land under forest department.
Thank you very much for that question. Yes, I think this is something that we need to study further. Yeah, we need to study further. Yeah, but then if we look at the example in Mizoram, for example, I think if you look at the example in Mizoram, there are areas which are many of the areas which are controlled by the community, community forest area, and then of course the community forest area, which is very much considered as an unclassed forest again. So technically, which is very much under the control of the forest department in a way, because when you divert any unclassed forest, it's a forest department that either divert or, like in the case of construction of large dam or whatever. So, so if you see the technical definition of forest, more or less under the description of forest is the one directly controlled by the forest, the reserve forest and whatever, and then of course there are unclassed. So what is obvious is in Mizoram, a lot of the community forest area is already diverted into palm oil cultivation. And in fact, yeah, if you look at the figures, there are a couple of studies, and then the latest figures is, the land which is already diverted for palm oil in Mizoram stands around 20,000 hectares now, and this is still increasing. And then we don't have the exact classification of which areas are under community or directly forest, but the assumption is a major portion of the land which is diverted for palm oil in Mizoram is very much under the cover of forest. Yeah, because, and then if you look at the community land ownership pattern, I think even if you look at the what you call the community traditional agriculture practice, it is very much part of the traditional agriculture practice very much involves rejuvenation of traditional forest areas as well. Which is very much maintaining a direct relationship with the forest. So yeah, so the answer can be both yes, and then and another area can be to study further on this, on the role of forest department, and then of course, as I also said, we also need to see the implementation of the new policy amendments, like the draft forest policy of 2018, the amendment to the Indian Forest Act of 1927, which amendment which comes out. There is a proposed amendment 2019, and then of course a lot of objections to that, but the fact is there is an ongoing process to amend the forest policies, and these are all geared towards providing an enabling environment to promote this kind of plantations, which cater to the needs of environmental mitigation and adaptation plan, and which very much include the palm oil, and so that's why I said a lot of things are already visible in Mizoram, but a lot of things are still sketchy, and we need a very detailed and very good documentation and research, looking into what is happening, looking into policy dimension, touching into the areas of climate change, into the areas of forest agriculture, and then of course looking into the areas of food and this and So yeah, so a lot more research is still required.
Thank you, Mr. Jiten, for this elaborate explanation. And I must tell that we have got enough food for thought, enough materials to discuss amongst us, and to discuss at our workplaces, at the same time to discuss with the community as well. So I thank, on behalf of the Corbett Foundation, I thank both the speakers. And so if with your kind permission, we would like to share the recordings so that many of our viewers and connections, which people who wanted to listen but they are not available right at this moment because of other engagements, they will benefit from your talks. So if you kindly permit, then we can share the recordings.
So it's fine from my side. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. So on behalf of the Corbett Foundation, I thank everyone. A big thank you to Dr. Braj Kumar Saab, Joint Director Ji, he is present, Dr. Chambo, and all the people of Rainforest Club and my colleagues. And we have to take this communication further. It's a big challenge, and on behalf of the community, we have to join hands together and undertake further research, as Mr. Jiten has also recommended. Thank you very much, both of my speakers and other audience. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.